Hello everyone. Thanks for joining today's SIS webinar. We're going to be taking a look at purchasing and AP automation the PN3 way. A little bit about SIS before we get started. SIS was founded in 1996 and we're headquartered in Duluth, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. SIS delivers business process solutions that help project and service-driven companies unify business processes and applications across the enterprise, thus delivering better visibility and efficiency. Some services that SIS offers are current state assessment, business process analysis, requirements and fit gap analysis, software design, development, and deployment, custom application development, ERP and CRM implementations, rapid deployments, and on-premise or cloud deployments. And our product focus is Microsoft Dynamics SL, Microsoft Dynamics 365, and Microsoft Dynamics CRM. A little bit of general info as we get started. If you have any problems with audio or video, just email us at info@sisn.com. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end, but go ahead and type out any questions into the chat box. And for optimal viewing, please view in full screen mode. And we're going to be recording this and sending it out within the next day, so keep an eye out for that in your inbox. Let's get started. I would like to introduce Derek Hicks, Managing Principal at PN3, and he's going to be showcasing purchasing and AP automation. Go ahead, Derek.
Thank you, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, so everyone should now see a slide deck that I have up. Please, if anyone cannot see that or is unable to hear me, please email Eric, as he mentioned, and we'll try to resolve that for you. So I have a very short slide deck that I'd like to go through just to kind of high level talk about the value proposition of our PN3 toolkit, and then I'll get into a demonstration so that you can see PN3 in action. Please, if you have any questions at all, as Eric mentioned, we'll do a Q&A at the end, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have as we're moving through. So without further delay, let's go ahead and kick the session off. One of the things I do want to mention before we start is that we do have seamless integration with Dynamics SL and Microsoft 365. So if you're using SL or 365, then we have very, very tight integrations with both of those ERPs. So in terms of the objectives that we're looking to accomplish with every client, they really tend to fall into three buckets. The first being improving process efficiency. And we're not solely talking about the accounting and finance team, although improving the efficiency of the accounting and finance team is critical. We're talking about every department, because purchasing and or AP touches virtually every department in most organizations. Secondly, we're focused on guaranteeing adherence to your policies and procedures. We've been in this purchasing and AP workflow space for, well, close to 20 years now. And every time we think we've seen almost every type of workflow requirement, we encounter a new one. And so PN3 is designed in such a way that it gives your accounting and finance team to easily configure workflows to adhere to your policies and procedures, which makes your management team happy, but also your auditing team. And then lastly, with everything becoming digital, you can better manage your process. It's not solely via email. It's not solely routing paper. You have a way to better manage the process and greater visibility, and no longer a need to maintain any paper-based files. We have a tool, PN3 for purchase requisitions, that gives staff the ability to create requisitions, route those requisitions for approval, and once fully approved, purchase orders can be created. I'd say maybe about 40% of our clients are using both our purchasing tool and our AP tool, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the balance don't issue any purchase orders at all, and everything is strictly AP automation. Now, on the AP automation side, there are various transaction types. Vendor invoices. Obviously, if it's an AP tool, we support processing vendor invoices, PO and non-PO. Expense reimbursements, reconciling credit card spend. Maybe you have staff that have organization credit cards, and reconciling that spend is a challenge. Getting the appropriate backup, getting the appropriate coding. Payment requests. I need to get payment to a vendor. I don't have an invoice. I'm not going to get one. Maybe in your process today, there's an internal check request form, but the payment request form in PN3 enables you to process those types of transactions. And then lastly, there's also functionality for routing contracts for financial and legal review, and then creating those contracts so that you can track payments against them as the vendor is providing services. Users can access PN3 not just in a browser, but in the mobile app as well. There's an iOS app and an Android app. You can also turn on functionality that would permit a user to approve or reject without having to log into PN3. Within the body of an email message, they'll see an approve and reject button so that they can approve without having to log in. And then lastly, before we get into the demonstration, we also now offer as an option payment processing as a service through our partnership with CPay Plus. Payments can be sent via virtual card, ACH, and check. So let's go ahead and transition into a demonstration now so you can see PN3 in action. Now, we find the best way to give you a feel for how PN3 works is to go through some workflow examples. Therefore, you're going to see me log in and out as different users. I'll start off as an AP user. I'll log in then as a manager, another manager, just to simulate processing transactions so that you can see how different staff and different roles would interact with PN3. So I'm going to log in here first as Pamela Hood, an AP user. And I want to kick off today's session talking about how are invoices received. And I'm going to go here to eCapture first because at this point, most of our clients are receiving the vast majority of their invoices via email. Vendors sending them via email straight from their billing system. So there's typically no paper involved in the process at all. Most clients already have a dedicated AP email account, but if they don't, we ask them to create one as part of their PN3 deployment. We configure PN3 to monitor the email account. And when we see a message come in that has a single PDF file attached or multiple PDF files, we grab each invoice and we pull it into this table. So as an AP user, I don't have to log into that AP email account to check on the status. I can see the status in PN3. I'm just going to open up one of the invoices here. So when I open the invoice up, on the right, I'm going to see the invoice, and on the left, I'll see my header fields. You'll notice in this case, we've already captured vendor name, ID, remit to address. We've also captured invoice number, date, and amount, because there's tools in PN3 that allows us to save templates for each vendor so we know for each vendor where to go to find invoice number, invoice date, and invoice amount. This data is already populated. This invoice happens to be a non-PO invoice, so I'm not going to link it to a PO, which means I need to get it approved. So I'm going to tell PN3 I want to send it to Mary Jones. There are other types of workflows and approval templates I could initiate as well, but in this example, I'm sending it to Mary, and I'm not going to code it because I want Mary to code it. However, if I did want to code it, I could code it before sending it out for approval. When I hit save and upload, off this invoice goes to Mary, and it then presents the next invoice. So the invoices that are coming in are queued up so that AP can take the appropriate action. Now, if your organization processes purchase orders and I need to link an invoice to a PO, I can do that in PN3 as well. I can tell PN3 what my PO number is. It pulls in the lines from the PO, and we can set up 2- or 3-way match invoice to PO to enable you to process PO invoices through PN3 as well. Most of our clients, if the invoice has confirmed receipt for the items that are being invoiced and there's no pricing issues, the 2- or 3-way match passes, and we send this invoice to the ERP. We do have some clients that require that someone approves every invoice, even if it's against the PO, and we can set that as your rule as well. But the key point here is that we can process both PO and non-PO invoices. Now, not all invoices are going to come via email, even though today the vast majority do. Some invoices are still coming in traditional mail. So you have functionality in PN3 to scan a batch in, or go to a network scanner, scan there, and import a batch of invoices. We can also reconcile credit card spend by manually pulling those charges in from a given statement, or we can set up automatic feeds from American Express and over 14,000 financial institutions so that it imports those charges each day as the cardholder is using his or her card. And then lastly, you can also import a group of invoices in from a spreadsheet. I'm going to sign out here as Pamela, the AP user, and I'm going to sign back in as Mary. Mary is the manager we just sent that invoice to. Mary receives an email alert. There's a link in the email alert that takes Mary to this login page, and when Mary logs in, we present what we call her task list. Most clients or users call this their inbox. So this shows Mary that there are 2 transactions awaiting her action. The second one is the invoice that we just routed to Mary. So Mary opens it up, and she takes a look at this invoice. So Mary could be anywhere. She could be working from home, traveling, in the office, wherever she is, she can still participate in this process. Mary looks at the invoice and she says, you know, I'd like to pay this. However, or approve it, I should say. However, as a manager, there may be times when a user receives a transaction and it probably should have gone to someone else. Well, Mary can easily see who sent it to her. These milestones become your audit trail. You can see the status of every transaction. Mary can see that Pamela sent it to her. If she wants to send it to Pamela without taking any action, all she has to do is hit route, tell PN3 that she's going to send it back to Pamela, and put in a note to explain why she's doing that. But again, in this case, Mary wants to approve it. But you'll notice above the approve button, it's telling me that coding is required. That's only because I turned that rule on. A lot of our clients was telling us, you know, we're getting some invoices back that have been approved and they haven't been coded, and we need to know how the department wants us to code it if it's not a vendor that we've coded invoices for in the past. So we can turn this rule on that will require a manager to code before they can approve. But again, only if you decide to enable this workflow rule. There are 3 ways that every manager can code an invoice. They can select add coding from spreadsheet, and they can import the codes from a spreadsheet. Next, they can select add new coding. Now, for most of our SL clients, there'll be a drop-down for account, a separate drop-down for sub-account, and if you're using Project Controller, a drop-down for project and task as well. If you're using D365, There's typically a drop down for the account, and every dimension is a separate drop down. You have the ability in PN3 to control which user can see which codes. So if I should only be able to code to certain projects or certain departments, you can limit me to only the codes I should see. But I will always see from the ones available to me the numeric value and the corresponding description. And I can create a single line of distribution or multiple lines. The last way that I can code is that each user can have their own default coding with a given vendor. Mary has default coding with this vendor Alert because she approves a lot of their invoices. So she simply says, I want to retrieve my default codes. Her default distribution lines are populated. If she wants to edit any or delete any, she can. She says this looks good. Let me drill down quickly to see what impact this is going to have on my budget. She can see her annual budget, what's committed, the current balance, what's pending approval, and what the balance would be if everything pending is approved. Mary says, perfect. I'm ready to approve this. Now, you'll notice that the coding is required button is gone or message because I've already coded. We talked about giving you the ability to configure workflows that adhere to your policies and procedures. I've set up Mary as a manager. However, I also told PN3 that Mary's approval limit is $1,000. This $12,015 invoice exceeds her approval limit. Doesn't mean we're not going to let her approve it. We certainly are, so that we can record that she approved it and when she did that. But instead of routing it to AP when she approves it, we're going to automatically route it to her manager, Susan, because it exceeds her approval limit. Eric, I want to pause for a second there. I want to make sure, and this might be an appropriate time, that there was a question that came in. Is it okay to answer that now, or would you prefer to hold it to the end? All right, that's great. We'll hold that question until the end, and I'm sure we'll cover that. The question was just posted. So I'm going to approve this now as Mary. Because it exceeds Mary's approval limit, it automatically routes to Susan. Susan is Mary's manager, and it then presents the next question or next transaction to Mary. The next transaction that was in Mary's task list is the credit card reconciliation. Mary happens to have an Organization American Express card, and these are the charges on her card. Shows the date of the charge, supplier, and the amount of the charge. Mary says, I don't want Amazon to hit my general ledger. Let me go ahead and put in details as to what this charge was for. Mary can then code. Again, typical SL will be account, sub-account, and/or project, and task. Typical 365 will be a separate drop-down for your account in each dimension. But Mary can then code. If I need to split this 9792, I can split it across multiple lines instead of one, and I can select Add to attach my backup. If I'm on my mobile phone and I'm reconciling this credit card spend, I can quickly take a picture of my receipt. But this form is a very efficient way for staff to reconcile their credit card spend. I'm going to come out of here as Mary because I want to continue processing that invoice that Mary just approved. So I'm going to sign in now as Susan. Susan is Mary's manager. Susan has the invoice that Mary just approved. It's in Susan's task list, and it routed to Susan again because it exceeded Mary's approval limit. Susan can see that Mary coded and approved the invoice in the date and time. Susan says, perfect. This looks great to me. I'm ready to approve it as well. However, I'm managing a contract with this vendor Alert, and I'd like to see the contract and see how much we've paid so far this year against that contract. So she links the invoice to the contract. As soon as she does that, two things will happen. The contract gets attached. She can select View to take a look at the contract. She can also, from here, drill down to see the contract amount, the amount paid, the balance, and when the contract expires. Susan says, perfect. I'm ready to approve this now as well. Susan's approval limit is $25,000. It exceeds the $12,015 invoice amount. So when she approves it, it's fully approved and it's gone back to AP. So if I sign out here as Susan and sign back in as Pamela, I'm going to see that the transaction has returned. And it now has a status of manager approved. Now, Pamela can see who approved it, who coded it. She can also check the codes. A lot of our AP users say, I don't always trust managers to code correctly, so if they didn't code right, I need to be able to make the necessary corrections or route it back to them to make the corrections. But once AP determines that this transaction is fine and we're ready to send it into the ERP, all you have to do is hit approve. If it's SL, it obviously has to be part of an AP batch. If there's no batch open for this AP user, we create one. If there is one, we add to that batch, assuming it's within the same period. If not, we'll create a new batch for that new period. If it's not SL, if you're using 365, we're just creating that AP bill, that AP voucher. But you'll never have to key anything in. The header and distribution information is passed over to create the voucher automatically as soon as AP approves it. Okay, so we talked a little bit about vendor invoices, both PO and non-PO. Let's talk about some of the other transaction types. I'm going to log back in as Mary Jones to do that. In addition to vendor invoices, there's a form we call the payment request form. Again, this form is only intended to be used if a staff person says, wow, I need to get a payment to a vendor. Maybe it's a new contract and it requires a deposit and I don't have an invoice. If I have an invoice or I know that an invoice is coming in, I'm not going to use this form. But if I don't have an invoice, I'm going to use this form to submit for approval to get that vendor paid. So I could come in and I select the vendor that needs to be paid. This is a drop down that shows the common use cases we see for this form, but each client creates their own payment request type drop down. Probably the most common one that we see is vendor deposit. Mary says, I need to get a deposit payment to this vendor by June the 11th. She selects add row. She puts in a description of what it's for, the amount of the deposit. She'll code, again, account, sub-account, project task if you're using project controller, or account and dimensions if it's 365. But Mary will then, select the appropriate codes, save that. She can attach backup. She can add additional lines. The sum of the lines becomes my invoice amount. And I can then submit this payment request into the workflow for approval. Again, I'm only using this if I don't have an invoice. If I have an invoice, this form is not required. But the payment request form is great to get payments to vendors in cases when no invoice is available. Next, there's an expense reimbursement form. And by the way, I always get reminded of this when I start the expense report form, but that payment request form, I could have initiated that on my mobile phone. So I can do things in the browser or in the mobile app. So Mary says this is my May expense report. In most cases, I would have started this at the beginning of the month and kind of add to it throughout the month, either from my browser or, again, on my mobile phone. So some of the charges could have come from the browser, other in the mobile phone. And I can have any date range. It can be the 1st through the 2nd, or as in this case, the 1st through the 31st. Mary says, I'm going to add my first expense. I had an expense on the 3rd. This is a drop down. Mary says this was, you create, by the way, your own user-defined expense categories. Quite often they're mapped to a GL account. Mary says, I had an airfare expense, and it was United Airlines. She puts in the, let me put a more reasonable cost in here. The cost, I'm just going to select any codes here just to code this quickly. She saves that. She can hit add to attach her backup. Again, if she's on her mobile phone, she can take a picture. Mary can also enter in mileage. If Mary needed to use her vehicle and she needs to be reimbursed, she can select the date. When she selects the date, the reimbursement rate is populated. This reimbursement rate is controlled by your PN3 administrator. Next, users will either key in the mileage, or if we've turned on the MapQuest integration, they're not permitted to key in the miles. They'll have to either key in a starting address or select it from a drop-down, and an ending address or select it from a drop-down. PN3 will calculate the miles times the rate to determine the reimbursement amount. So this form can be used for mileage reimbursement as well as out-of-pocket expenses. Mary might save this, add to it throughout the month. Whenever she's ready, she'll route her expense report for approval. Contract requests. I mentioned earlier that you can set up workflows for the approval of contracts. So staff can fill out the contract request form, attach a draft of the contract, and route the contract for both financial and legal review. Once the contract is approved and fully executed, you can attach an executed version of that contract and then process invoices against that contract as I did earlier. All right, let's come out of here for a second, and I'm going to go into requisitions. We've talked for the most part so far about payables, AP. Again, about 40% of our clients are using PN3 not just for AP automation, but to streamline their purchasing processes as well. So we have a tool, PN3 for purchase requisitions. Has a real the same look and feel, if you will, of AP. But in this tool, I'm submitting requisitions for approval. I can open up a blank requisition form, but I can also generate a new request from a previous PO. Mary says, I need to order some stuff from this vendor, Streamline. And this PO here is the PO that has the items that I ordered from them in the past. It pulls in all of those items. I can edit, delete, add new rows. I can also create a services only PO if it's just for services so that I can receive in dollar amounts versus units. But in this case, Mary says, I need to place the exact same order that I placed earlier. However, I need to change my requested delivery date. And I'm going to try to get this really quickly. So my requested date is going to be the 31st. I'm sorry, I know that happens to be a holiday, but let's save this form. And Mary says, I'm now going to kick off the approval process. If Mary's not a manager, she can route to kick off the approval process or select one of the workflow types or approval templates. In this case, Mary is a manager. So she's going to approve this requisition, but it exceeds her approval limit. So when she approves it, it automatically routes, as the invoice she approved earlier did, to her manager, Susan. Signing in quickly as Susan. Susan opens up the requisition. She can see the requisition. At any point, anyone can attach supporting documents. Susan says, this looks good. I'm ready to approve this. Susan's approval limit exceeds the request amount of $22,750. So when it's approved by Susan, it will do one of two things. It will either route to your purchasing or buying team, and sometimes in the workflow that's done before the approvals, which can certainly be accommodated. Or if you have a very decentralized process and you don't have purchasing agents or buyers, we can send it back to the requester. In this case, it went back to Mary, and Mary's able to generate her purchase order. Mary can select Generate Purchase Order. PN3 will assign a PO number. We can automatically email the PDF of the PO to the vendor, or you can manually create a PDF of the purchase order. And in that PDF will have your logo and your terms and conditions. At that point, I'm waiting for delivery. And when items start to come in, I can receive against the PO as well. If everything was delivered, I can receive all. If it was in different shipments, I can specify what was received in the given shipment. So I can receive, and then I can voucher against those receipts. All right, let's talk for a second about reports. Let me come back into payables. I'll look at some of the AP reports with Pamela, the AP user. And a really popular report, and as you can see, there's a really long list, but the really popular report, probably most popular, is the Open Transactions report. This report says, I'm going to show you everything that's in the PN3 workflow that has not been fully approved and sent to your ERP. We break these transactions up by how aged they are, 0 to 30, 31 to 60, 61 to 90, and anything greater than 91 days. These are your pending liabilities, but these are transactions that are not in the ERP. So you can see the status. You can see who has them, who the vendor is, invoice number, date, amount, so you'll never have to guess where any transaction is. Each report can be printed, exported to Excel. I can also link to any transaction. There's accrual reports, check signers reports, so a lot of different reports to help you manage your purchasing and or AP processes. Lastly, PN3 eliminates the need to maintain any paper files. Staff can come to this transaction retrieval page and search for any transaction. I can search by company if you have multiple companies. I can search by vendor, by invoice number, status, the dates, when it was due. I can search by who took action. You can search by how it was coded. Maybe in your structure you have cost centers or departments, or maybe you have projects and tasks. You can search by those. But any dimension or segment you can search by. A really common search is often by vendor. So I'm telling PN3, I want to see every transaction for this vendor in the first quarter of this calendar year. Most of our clients will apply security to this to control who can see what, but when I hit search as a user, this list is going to show me all of the transactions that I can see that met the search criteria I entered. I can view this. I can export this table to Excel. I can generate a PDF of all of these transactions. I can even drill back to look at an individual transaction. So if I'm curious when this one was paid, I don't have to call accounting. I can check in PN3 and see that. Now, if we're processing the payments on your behalf through our partner CPay Plus, it'll tell you to see the CPay Plus data. If not, if it's being processed through your ERP, it will show was it processed? Was it a check? Was it an ACH? The payment number, the actual payment date, and the amount. So I don't have to call accounting and finance to check on the status. I can see the status in PN3. Cuts down significantly on the number of calls that you receive. Most of our clients also, when their auditors are doing their field work, they give auditors read-only access to PN3 to check on the status of transactions. They don't ask the client to can you pull these 10, 20 transactions? They can do their due diligence in PN3 without interrupting the client. Okay, let me get back over here to my slide deck. These webinar demos are really only intended to give you just a glimpse into what PN3 could potentially do. In order to really take a deep dive, if you will, we'd like to set up one-on-one demonstrations where we can open up the phone lines and have detailed discussions about your requirements And then from that, if you determine that there is a PN3 solution that meets your needs, we can then present a proposal. So if you've seen something that you think might be of interest to your organization, please reach out to your SIS contact and request that you'd like to receive additional information. Before we wrap up, we're going to open it up, Eric, and let's answer any questions that have come in.
Thanks, Derek. First question that we have that came in was, where was the budget from, GL or project?
For the vast majority of our clients, it's a GL budget, not a project budget. But we have the ability to pull project budgets in as well. But for most, it's a GL budget.
Okay, great. If the client uses ImageLink, does the attachment feature interoperate with ImageLink? Can they see other ImageLink images through PN3?
I don't believe we've done any projects like that, so I'm not familiar with integrating it with ImageLink, but it's maybe we can discuss that with this particular attendee and you can get more details of it. But I don't recall that we've integrated with ImageLink in the past.
Okay. What if the client uses the SL project controller? Do you have project, task, and account category in PN3, or is this a customization?
No, we have, I was going to say maybe 30, 40. It's probably more like 25% of our SL clients use project controller. And so it's not a customization. It's just a PN3 configuration that enables that in PN3 so that they can code to projects and tasks in PN3. And those projects and tasks will come from SL and the business rules you have in SL that determine, does this account require project and task? That flows to PN3 as well. So it's an out-of-box configuration. It's nothing that we have to do custom.
Okay. Can the clients do the customizations themselves, and what is the model?
We really try to stay away from customizations, and the answer specifically is no, you can't. If it turns out that you just have to have a customization, we will do it for you, but we try to stay away from them for some of the obvious reasons of having to do upgrades being more challenging. We have a new release every 90 days. And so most of our functionality requests come from our clients. And what we do is we try to, as quickly as possible, roll your request into a future release so that you get that functionality, because it's highly likely that others are going to want something similar to that as well. So we try to stay away from customizations if we can.
Okay. Is this available in all SL versions?
It is available in any SL version, yes.
All right, that looks like all the questions that have come in. If you do think of any other questions, please email us and reach out, and we'll be happy to answer those. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us for this webinar today, and keep an eye out for the upcoming webinars that we're going to be sending you info about, as well as the Microsoft Dynamics SL User Group Conference happening later this year in Houston, Texas. I want to thank you, Derek, for being with us today, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.